Welcome to episode 29 of the Disc and Dice podcast. My name is Paul. As I am every episode, I'm joined here by JT and Timmy.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you guys going today?
Well, I'm feeling like after that little first noises from JT and I, we need to add like 2 to 3 more people to this podcast so we can have like a barbershop vibe going on, like a hello.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you could say I'm good.
yeah. I know your brother's a bit of an expert with that, Timmy. So maybe we can get him in on the podcast.
Yeah, not even joking. His chorus at the most recent Australian National Barbershop competition scored the highest score that has ever been scored in Australia. So he knows what he's doing.
He's min-maxing music.
So much like that is so my brother. Sorry to cut you off there, JT, but he has an Excel spreadsheet that he keeps he lists every item of clothing in it so he can make sure he wears every possible combination of his clothes.
Oh my
And he
god!
can write down like a note next to it to be like, didn't like this, or this belt didn't go with this shirt, or whatever. Like the amount of combinations is so high he'll never do it. But I'm bringing this up because when you say he's min-maxing music, he is a music nerd and he is a maths nerd and he loves a spreadsheet. So pretty much.
You know what? This explains a lot. Like your brother is always seems kind of like snappily dressed whenever I've seen him. Now
Yeah.
it's all sort of falling into place.
Like my brother's the kind of guy that if you see him in a t-shirt, it takes you like 30 seconds of being like, why does Mitchell look so weird today? And it's like, oh, I can see all of his neck. Like he's got a collar on and a tie and a vest, So
The price you pay to be a
Mhm.
prodigy.
that's it. That's it.
Now, just very quickly, we do play board games with Mitchell from time to time.
Mhm.
Does he play video games as well? I wouldn't even know. I've never asked him.
I mean, like he did growing up, like as much as I did. Like he had his own Wii when they were like pretty new, and that was like his baby. And he had like the Force Unleashed games because he was a big Star Wars fan, and he got me into like the original Star Wars Battlefronts. Like we used to play a lot of that on the family Xbox. So like yeah, he got into games, and he's always liked having like the Nintendo consoles because I think he likes it as a social thing. So he's still got his Wii and he'll still bust that out and play it and stuff. But like, you know how it's kind of like a priority thing? Spending on the current generation console is just never a priority for him. So he enjoys it and he looks at games and he says, if anybody's feeling especially generous this Christmas, I'll have a PlayStation 4 at this game, It's kind of a joke. But yeah, he doesn't have enough of a burning desire that he kind of goes out and spends on himself. But he is quite frugal, so who knows?
What we're trying to say here, Mitchell, is sorry you can't come on the podcast. You don't play enough video games.
Yeah, I'm thinking we're going to need a better reason now to get him on if we want to have that. Have him like do the what do you call it, barbershop thing with the hellos at the start. We need a new reason.
Look, we did ask him to write us a theme song ages ago, and he wrote a song which I totally love, but probably wasn't appropriate. So maybe like he can get his barbershop quartet to do something snappy for us instead, and then it'll all come full circle. Mitchell on the podcast, showing off his barbershop skills on our new theme song.
Do you know that would actually be amazing? Yeah, I'm thinking about it. Like I'd always imagined in terms of theme songs that you just have something instrumental because that's how it works. But then I'm kind of imagining now that you just go completely the other direction. You don't have kind of like an instrumental song with some vocals. You just go with that.
Yeah,
I like it.
Essentially a cappella.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap this episode up and get in touch with Mitchell and just get that happening.
Yeah, quit wasting our listeners' valuable time until we have a barbershop quartet theme song to show for ourselves. We've set that bar now, so that's what we need to do.
Exactly. Well, let's move it on from Timmy's brother. Next week we'll begin our episode with a discussion of someone else's brother. But we should talk about some games, considering that's what the podcast is about. And JT, I think you finished up something that we talked about last week.
Yes. I finished Spec Ops: The Line. If no one knows what it is, it's an older third-person shooter. Listen to the last podcast if you want to know my thoughts back then. But having finished it and hearing about the buzz behind it over the years, it being a really, really good plot, I have to agree. I wasn't totally sold on the game while I was playing with it. The action sequences weren't really that memorable. It's really quite repetitive. But then I came to realize that if you're playing that game, you're really not playing it for the interactive elements per se. You really are playing it for the plot line and some of the decisions that you make along the way. So the payoff was actually really, really good.
So I have like questions because like in the last episode we were kind of talking about these kinds of big, I don't want to say twists, I don't think that's the right word as I've heard it described, but the kind of reveals and the kind of, I suppose, yeah, no, reveal is the word for it, of kind of the essence of that game seemed like a huge part of the selling point of that game. And when we were discussing it with you, it didn't sound like we were kind of talking about the same thing. Like Paul and I were going, we've heard this and this and this, and you were going like, oh yeah, I can kind of see like kind of that, and they're doing some interesting things. But to me, at least, either it wasn't as big a deal as the reviews I read and watched made it seem, or you hadn't got to the thing we were talking about. So thinking back to the last episode, do you understand kind of what we were driving at when we were asking
Yeah,
about the whole PTSD,
I do now.
unreliable narrator kind of stuff?
Yes, I do totally now. And it really doesn't become apparent until the last act of the game. Building up to that, there's a lot of seeds being placed throughout the first two acts, and then when it comes to the last one, all those seeds start to fall into place and form this really quite an intricate sort of reveal. I guess it is a kind of a twist at the same time, but I don't really like using that term in this setting because it's not really like a oh my god moment. It's more of a I guess it kind of confirms some beliefs that you still or that you come up with leading up to the third act, and it just does it in such a way that it's almost like a really, really good movie. Is really what it felt like when you were playing it. So
Yeah, and
definitely thumbs up for me.
did you ever stop to consider like what this would have been like around the release date of the game? Like we spoke about how this came out in amongst like the more successful, modern warfares and battlefields and
Yeah,
whatnot. Like it was kind of right at the height of multiplayer shooters on the last generation, I think. And we were kind of remarking that maybe it only stood out then, and games have gone further since. Do you think like did it make you go, wow, this is very impressive for the time and not so much now, or was it just very impressive in general?
I'd say so. It came out in 2012. I'm pretty sure. The screens in the game when you load it up say copyright 2012, so I assume that's when it came out. From a technical standpoint, in terms of mechanics and graphics, it's really probably quite dated even for its time, but the writing is far different and far better than any of the Battlefield or COD series, which are just stock standard action storylines. This is much more morally grounded, with very large consequences along the way that really actually make you care about the characters and what they're doing. And again, a lot of that doesn't really happen till the third act. At least for me, that's what happened. Maybe it might be different for other people. But from a writing perspective, it's really a shining light out of a lot of the other games that would have come around the time. And even now, it's much better writing than a lot of the games that are still coming out now. So
that's good to hear, because I've, like we said last week, I've kind of had this on my to playlist for a while. It's good to hear that holds up, because that's what I would play it for. Like I'm not really a shooter person in any game, so I can kind of like, even if the shooter mechanics were kind of up to date, that's going to be sort of neither here nor there for me. So it's cool to hear the narrative holds up. Timmy, I think you made a good point there about like it being sort of revolutionary for the time as well. It made me think of like, I remember I played Bioshock probably like a bit over a year ago, and we talked about it on the podcast, and there were kind of things in Bioshock for me playing it for the first time in 2019 or maybe even 2018 that felt like they were pretty dated. And like you had pointed out, that these were things that Bioshock had done first, and that sort of I had like a decade of games that had copied Bioshock after that, but playing it in 2018, it felt like I've seen all these mechanics before. This is a really rudimentary version of that system. So I guess my point there is that, JT, it sounds like that's not the case here. It sounds like the story holds up because it hasn't been surpassed by the general standard of writing in the last 8 years.
Yeah, it feels that way for me as well. I would actually also, for anyone who hasn't played it and does want to play it, I really recommend playing it on the easiest difficulty, because the sequences where you are doing battle are quite drawn out if it's a harder difficulty. And for me, that just took away from the storyline. Dying over and over again for really no real reason other than that it was just a kind of, small little gun battle, took away from the narrative flow for me. So when I switched it to the easier difficulty after just getting a bit fed up with that, the game was way more enjoyable in every possible way. Now that I wasn't dying, and I felt like that's how, watching a movie, that's how it would be. They wouldn't be stuck on these drawn out long battle sequences and then this great narration or narrative. So changing to the easy difficulty just made everything flow better. It made it feel more movie like. The game was over in a more reasonable amount of time for me. And so that's my recommendation for anyone who hasn't played it yet. Play it on the easy difficulty, save yourself a bit of time.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I have done that with Uncharted and Last of Us games. Maybe a little bit less with Last of Us, but because Uncharted is so movie-like, I'll do the same thing, like lowest difficulty, just so it really flows and keeps the pacing up.
I actually did it recently as well, on Jedi Fallen Order.
Oh yeah.
And I did this after speaking to you, Paul, because I asked you what difficulty you chose, because this was one of the first games I played where there didn't seem to be like a stock standard normal setting. Like you had to read, there was like, play this one if you just want the story, play this one if you're new to this kind of game, play this one if you're experienced with it, and play this one if you want hardcore mode. And there wasn't one that was a clearly defined, like, this is how the developers intended it to be played, which is what I normally go for. I'll normally always go for like what I consider normal, because I'll be like, well, that was their base, so I'll experience it like that. And it was actually quite freeing, because I think we've spoken a little bit about how like it's a very intense and rhythm focused combat system in that game. And in many ways, perhaps the coding and development isn't quite up to what their ambitions were. And I messaged you about it, and you said, yeah, whenever I got to a boss, I dropped the difficulty down just because it was just repetitive, and I didn't feel like it was worth my time doing this over and over again. And I've been doing that as well, and kind of just swapping between normal mode and easy mode for like depending who I'm fighting. It's totally freeing. I've normally been like a real stickler for no, I said normal at the start, so I have to stick to it, or no, I'm on the hard difficulty, so I'm going to stick with that, right? But I guess it's kind of like we've spoken about when JT was doing his stream library. You don't owe it to a game to finish it if you're not enjoying it.
Totally.
So you don't owe it to like this difficulty setting to be like who knows and who cares if you swap it down to easy because you're bashing your head against a brick wall doing the same boss battle over and over again.
The only times I usually slug it out in terms of raising the difficulty, a good example of this is in Witcher 2. You get rewarded for playing at the highest difficulty. It's the only way to get certain pieces of gear. There's like this cursed gear that you can get. And so I did it because I wanted that. And so I was happy to, because there was some incentive for the punishment, I didn't mind it. But, in a game when there's no incentive and it, like you said, it breaks that rhythm, then I don't really see much of a point.
Yeah, the only game that I would do it in, kind of along the same lines as JT, is FIFA. And it's for the same reason, because if you play at a high level, you get more coins as a reward in the Ultimate Team mode. So that's the whole reason for me to like push the difficulty up is the rewards are better. So yeah, I'll try and improve.
I had one more question about Spec Ops before we move on, because last episode when we were kind of trying to ask JT questions about it without properly knowing it ourselves and potentially giving things away for him, we mentioned the consequences of your actions element that we had heard about, and they're kind of trying to show you, we're playing a war game and we're just shooting the faceless enemies, but does that have a real world impact on these characters in the game and stuff like that? I'm not explaining that very well, but I think you get what I mean. And JT, you kind of mentioned that it was fairly linear, and so like it's presented like your choices, but you can really only do one thing. Now, given that you've had this big reveal, do you feel like they at least sold the illusion of choice? Like, did you feel responsible for the things you had done when like you got to that third act?
Yeah, it wasn't apparent to begin with, but a lot of those choices actually do branch off into completely different endings. It's just in no way apparent until you really arrive at I guess, the terminus of, each little plot line. So having played it through, I got my conclusion. I went back onto YouTube to see at what things change what and what the different outcomes are. And there's some really quite harrowing things that can actually happen as a result of some of the actions that you take. Although going back to that last episode and what you were just mentioning, there are points that are obviously an illusion of free choice at the time. But I kind of feel like they throw those in there to mask some of the actual choices that have a different outcome or can affect an outcome.
We say it a lot, but like we often mention that like the strength of The Witcher is that when you play it, you feel like you could have only done it that way, and you go, how could anybody have possibly ended up anywhere else? And it sounds like, for a much earlier game and one with a smaller scope, they've done a good job of managing that here as well.
Yeah, I actually would really, really, really be interested to see them do another title like this. Whether it's another reboot or a follow-on from this one somehow, I'd be really keen to see another sort of war game that has that kind of personal or theme of personal consequence and larger picture sort of narrative. So hopefully, fingers crossed, something like that happens. But yeah,
I was actually going to say, does anyone know what they did after Spec Ops? Like I'm kind of blanking on who the developer was. But
yes.
do you know what they did after this? Like, have they done anything else?
There's nothing else in the Spec Ops franchise, and even this one was this title was a massive departure from the other Spec Ops game, which were more in line with like a simulation sort of thing or like tactical shooter. But yeah, they haven't done anything after that in this franchise. I'm just looking who the developers were. Jaeger Development. So I don't really know too much about them. But they have done some other stuff, it looks like. A game called Dreadnought in 2017 on the PS4. and another game called The Cycle last year, which
yeah.
is early access. So
I think I saw
um,
I saw Dreadnought, and I gotta say, Dreadnought to me almost looked like a kind of like free to play thing that I expected to be a mobile game. Like
right,
that was something that really didn't look appealing to me at all.
yeah, actually, I have seen The Cycle. I watched someone online play it recently, um, and that's a competitive shooter.
Mm.
So much in the sort of same vein as like PUBG or maybe even Overwatch and those types of games. So yeah, it's probably not really for me, to be honest, because I played so many of those games. Um, but yeah, there you go. If you are keen to check out what that developer is doing now, there you go.
Yeah. Well, I don't hate the idea that it's like it's a once off. You know, it's like they've kind of produced this masterpiece, and then they didn't make like 3 sequels in the last 10 years to try and capitalize on it. It's just this like this one gem that they put out. It's kind of cool that I don't know. In some ways, it's kind of cool that it's not been followed up with a bunch of stuff. If you know what I mean.
I mean, just while we're very quickly, while we're still talking about Spec Ops, I mean, if you really want to have a good takeaway um, from the game, is maybe not to look at the developer, but who wrote the game and see what they've done recently.
Yeah. Okay.
So
That's a good point.
I was just doing that actually.
Okay.
Richard
What
Piercy and Walt Williams.
Yeah, and I also looked at the director, Corey Davis and Francois Coulon. None of them have like hyperlinked names on Wikipedia, so I can't just like jump across to see what they've been doing.
That's the extent of our video game journalism.
That's
Yep.
it. That's the research
That's
we
it.
do for
Yep.
you, the listeners.
As far as we're concerned, they all died after the game, and that's it.
Actually, I think they died in the game.
It was a documentary.
Well, look, so that's a game from 2012, but I've been playing something a little bit newer. I finally gotten my hands onto the controller to try out Death Stranding for myself. I spoke about this towards the end of last year because Shayla had started playing it and was like losing her mind. She declared it the game of the year, like easily. She reckoned.
Be cool.
Really had a good time with it. She's currently sitting next to me playing it right now with a scowl on her face because it's
So you can't say anything bad about it.
Oh no, like I don't have anything bad to say just yet. Like on my own playthrough, I'm kind of up to where she was up to when I was talking about her having started it. So I've not seen anything else yet, but there's something to be said for the way this game handles, because you know that you play as kind of like a courier of sorts. That was maybe like the only really clear thing about this game, I think, from the trailers, which were pretty vague, but you could see that you were traversing large swaths of the wilderness with packages on your back to deliver. And I was concerned that this would get very boring very quickly, but so far, it's incredibly easy just to lose yourself in this world, delivering packages and finding abandoned packages that other delivery people didn't make it with. And the reason for that is they've got a really, really interesting, or at least involved physics engine in that you're stacking more and more packages on your back. And so it gets harder to handle the weight, and not just in a inventory management way. If I have a whole stack of things on my back and I'm walking down a hill, if I stop pressing forward, I'm not just going to stop moving forward. He has to take a few kind of bracing steps. And if I turn to the left too quickly, the weight in those packages is going to shift and it's going to start making me topple. And so I have to counter by pulling the other trigger to shift my weight to the opposite side.
So you
Stuff
raise
like
the
that.
stakes.
Yeah.
Every time you grab a package, you're gambling.
Yeah. And I know that might still sound like a little bit like, how interesting is that really going to make it? But it just, the way they use like the haptics, like the rumbling and stuff in the controller is really effective. Like you just really feel in control of yourself. And then you're putting that in a world that's like really zen to be walking through because it's kind of abandoned, um, and like overgrown and whatnot. So it's kind of like matching a bit of the world we know but abandoned vibe of The Last of Us with that kind of really zen wilderness of Zelda Breath of the Wild. But then you kind of have to learn how to control yourself in a way that other games haven't done. I don't know if I'm selling it. It might sound really tedious, but for me, I've been really enjoying it, and I wasn't expecting to enjoy this element of it. I thought that might be interesting, but I still wasn't convinced that the delivering packages was going to be a strong selling point. But so far, like I'm having a really good time.
You mentioned before that you said, seeing a package that someone else had dropped. Now, the most interesting thing that I've heard about this game is the kind of half persistent online stuff where, like you say, you can see other people's drop packages, or you can see like other bridges and things that people have built throughout the world. It sounds like it's got a bit of like or they can leave messages and things. It almost sounds a bit like that Dark Souls stuff, where you can sort of interact with people through things you leave in the game world. Have you had a chance to like get into much of that?
I haven't gotten into it myself because like I've played the prologue and then the first chapter. I might even still be at the tail end of the first chapter, I think.
Okay.
So I haven't played a lot, but I have seen Shayla playing a lot, and I have seen this element of people leaving things in your world, or like they can leave because you can pick up boxes and stuff from other deliveries gone awry, and not all of them are actually other people in the world. Some of them are just like you know spawned by the game, and they have different delivery locations, and it's not always convenient for you to traverse in the opposite direction just to drop this off if it's not part of your story. So you can kind of store them, and you can find where other people have stored them and go, oh, I can take that and deliver it. But a lot of it is set up with the aesthetic of like a social network. And I don't mean it goes into like a browser screen or anything like that, but like you can see where somebody has done something and you can give it like a thumbs up, or you can see that they've left something there with a thumbs up. And it's this interesting kind of almost commentary on the nature of social interactions as we have them in 2019, 2020. I'm expecting that to be a focus of the game, just judging on its presence in this. I think Hideo has something to say about that because the whole point of the game is that there's been this catastrophe that's affected the world, and people can't leave the cities now, and everyone's very isolated. So they rely on these couriers or porters, like the main character is, to deliver things and keep people connected uh, through this kind of destroyed world. And the back of the box even says something about calling it the new Strand genre of games. You can see people have left ladders and stuff around. So I kind of expect this not to be like a focus of the narrative, but the focus of perhaps the meta commentary.
Yeah, I think that's from what I've read. That is some of the stuff that Hideo has sort of hinted at, or maybe not even hinted at. It might be quite a blatant theme, but is that the stranding, like it's all to do with the connections between people, and then finding new connections and reconnecting. From what I have seen of the game, one thing that I do really like about the game, because all I know about it, apart from obviously that it has been hyped up a fair bit, but it does look like a really, really beautiful game. And as far as post-apocalypse games go, most of them really do just follow the same sort of tropes, and sort of environments always look very, very similar. But Death Stranding seems to have a pretty fresh take on, the post-apocalyptic ideas,
Yeah,
from
it's
what I
like
could see anyway.
their catastrophe is kind of like, I don't know, it almost seems more Lovecraftian.
Mm,
It's
That's
not,
interesting.
yeah, like, as in, it's like this kind of art, figures in the sky, completely not understandable kind of world changing events, not like it's not a nuclear wasteland. It's not like there's been some war that's ravaged everywhere. It's this supernatural thing that has happened and is a constant risk, but it hasn't destroyed the planet. So people can't be there. So they're limited to the cities. And when they die, their bodies have to be disposed of immediately and stuff like that. But because the world isn't totally wrecked, it's like still quite nice and pretty, and the game looks fantastic. And like I said, it's very calming being out there in the world when you're not, being confronted or attacked. So yeah, in that essence, JT, you're absolutely right. It's post-apocalyptic in the sense that life as we know it has been forced to change dramatically, but the world itself hasn't faced an apocalypse. It's only us people that have.
Which in some ways, you know, without playing the game and only seeing some of the stuff, might even be more haunting and almost creepy and eerie, because you've got this world that doesn't look so destroyed, but there's no one around, kind of thing. Like when you walk down this main street of Adelaide, say, at like 3 in the morning on a weeknight, and there's just no cars around, and it's just that kind of eeriness. It might be the same kind of feeling. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. Like I said, I'm fairly early on, and just watching um, Shayla fire up the menus and the various inventories and stuff, I can tell there is so much that is still going to be introduced for my playthrough. So I'm really only just scratching the surface, but at the moment that is like spot on for what the world feels like. But there are also other elements that I have experienced that I haven't spoken about that kind of change that up as well.
I'm actually interested. You saying that you've only scratched the surface. This might not be so apparent yet, but one of the criticisms of the game, from some reviewers was that there's a lot of needless sort of micromanagement or mini games. I think one of the things someone said they were frustrated them was, things like you have to urinate or something. I don't know if that was actually in the game, but
Yeah.
there's small things that you constantly have to do over your journeys that they say eventually become a bit monotonous, or like they said, needless.
Well, I think this comes back to, we had a discussion a few episodes ago about realism in gaming and finding the balance. Like what is realism that makes you feel invested in the world, and like there's an element of I'm actually doing this and this is what it would be like, versus when does it stop being fun? Because it's all fantasy fulfillment when we're playing games. Like if I really wanted to run across hundreds of kilometers of wilderness to deliver stuff, I'm sure I could find a way to do that. So yeah, you absolutely have to make sure you go to the bathroom if your bladder is full, and every single item of clothing you wear like can degrade over time. Your shoes in particular, you've got a little bar in the heads up display because you're constantly running and moving. This part of this post-apocalyptic world is that the rain, they call it timefall because it ages you and everything around it if you get caught in it. So you have to have protective gear. So of course it's going to wear out if you get rained on, So there is lots of stuff like that. Um, I haven't played enough to have gotten sick or bored of anything yet, but I also haven't experienced a lot of this kind of, it's not inventory, but a lot of this equipment management or health management. You've got stamina, you've got health, you've got like the happiness of the little baby thing on your chest you would have seen. You have to look after your items. You have to, make sure you're urinating when you need to. So there is a lot to keep track of, but it seems like that's the game. It seems like this is what this is about, right? Like he could have just as easily given you a bike so you can get around quicker, but that's not the point. The point is that you are delivering packages by foot. It's the very real stakes of having to keep people connected at possibly your own expense.
I had a very different question. I wanted to ask whether you had seen any of the amazing product placement yet.
I haven't, like in my own playthrough, but I have seen them in like watching Shayla play. I've seen stuff online. I've seen some of the really weird meta stuff.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Like Norman Reedus's TV show, like being
advertised on
talked
the
about.
shower one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like when you Sam Porter Bridges, the character that is mocapped and voiced by Norman Reedus, gets in the shower, there's like an ad on the outside of the shower, which makes no sense because it's facing outwards, so he can't see it anyway. So who is that ad for? Except for the player, and it is for I think a telly movie that he did. You know, it's very Hideo Kojima, I suppose. Like he is constantly, I think, breaking the fourth wall. Might not be the right word. Hanging a lantern on the fact that he knows it's a video game. He kind of doesn't want you to forget that what you're doing isn't real. It seems, which is kind of, I guess, at odds with the fact that he's making the game you're playing. He's striving for such realism in, what the character is doing. But then he goes, but hey, don't forget, this is just a game. This isn't real.
Most other games just tell you to have a 15-minute break in the loading screens, but Hideo Kojima, this is how he does it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I'm at the point of the game at the moment where I've gotten so many weird things and characters I don't understand and things happening that I really can't even begin to understand what is going on. But I'm early enough that I'm just trusting that it's going to start making sense. But then I remember the director and designer of this game, and I think maybe I'm not ever going to understand that. So you can't take anything for granted. But yeah, so I've said it so many times. I've only just started playing this game, so I'm sure I'll talk about it at length later on when I have a bit more of an understanding. And I feel like it would do a disservice to the game to try and critique it too harshly based on what little I've played. But I'm very excited to continue on with it. But Paul, what about you, mate? What have you been playing?
Well, you were talking about just starting playing Death Stranding. I've just started playing the last Witcher expansion, so Blood and Wine, which I obviously hadn't got to until now, and this came out like I don't know what 2-3 years ago, maybe even more. And obviously, like we don't need to rehash our love for The Witcher, but I'd kind of saved this one intentionally, like put it to the side because so that I still had one last bit of The Witcher 3 to enjoy when I was ready for it. I didn't want to like burn through the whole thing when I was playing the base game. And after watching the Netflix show, it kind of got me in the mood for the Witcher universe, so I decided to jump back into Blood and Wine. And yeah, I've played a few hours of it so far, and I'm absolutely loving it, which is no surprise whatsoever, considering how we felt about The Witcher 3. But the first thing is I really like the setting, the new area of Toussaint that the game is set in. It's such a change of pace from the setting of The Witcher 3. Witcher 3 is sort of quite gritty everywhere you go. Like everything is dark, everything is dirty. The color palette of almost everywhere you go is kind of quite muddy and grey, even when you go to places that look a bit different. But this setting for Blood and Wine is so completely different. I don't think I've even seen it rain in the entire time that I've been playing so far, and it is just bright colors everywhere, like sunlight shining, clean streets, clean cities, all that kind of thing. It's really cool.
Yep, it's in Australia. It's actually known as The Witcher McLaren Vale.
Yeah, there is lots of like winery stuff going on.
Well, yeah,
It's
you
got
mentioned
Paul's parents' house in there.
it feels like if you're in kind of Scandinavia or Northern Europe for normal Witcher, it kind of feels like you've gone to France or Italy for Blood and Wine, doesn't it? You're definitely in that wine villa country.
Yeah, and even the kind of main city, which I think is called Beauclair, has like a Renaissance Europe feel to the city, kind of like you're saying, Timmy. It's like it's from Italy or France, somewhere like that. It reminds me a bit of playing the Assassin's Creed games, the Assassin's Creed 2 and the sequels to that game. It all kind of
Yep.
reminds me a little bit of that. Whereas Novigrad in Witcher 3, which I absolutely love as a place in the game, is that feels like it feels more almost like medieval compared to this. It feels like everything's a bit dirty, like you can see the poverty on every corner and that kind of thing. Whereas Toussaint feels like it feels like things are a little bit nicer here. It's really cool.
And even the poor people in, is it Toussaint? How do you actually pronounce that? It's a can never remember when I was reading it. Tau Saint.
Yeah,
Tau's taint.
I assumed
I'll say Toussaint.
I assumed the T is silent because everything else is French themed. So yeah.
Yeah, but one thing you notice is everything is in complete contrast to Witcher 3. The normal environment, because even like the less fortunate people are still always very happy. They're always there in the vineyards working. It's just complete change of pace.
From memory, there might be
Witcher 3.
less vitriol directed towards Geralt just for being Geralt as well.
Yeah, I think it's
right?
like a little bit more bohemian almost in a lot of areas.
Yeah, that's interesting actually. I hadn't thought of that, Timmy, but I think you're right. I think I haven't had that experience of rocking up to a new like quest hub and having a bunch of people abuse me, which is kind of what you get all through Witcher 3. It's sort of you turn up and sometimes half the people have heard of you and things like that, and they're quite happy to have you there. But in terms of the setting, like I don't want to talk much about the story, obviously. So I kind of just want to talk about the setting a bit. I like that it kind of has a traditional fantasy feel a little bit in Toussaint, which is kind of weird because generally I'm not a huge fan of sort of very traditional, elves and dwarves and things like that fantasy. I like that The Witcher is sort of, it's a bit grittier. It kind of throws like racism in there as a way to kind of have a bit of social commentary. I am kind of enjoying though that Toussaint almost feels like it's poking fun at traditional fantasy. You have like bright colors everywhere. You have an elven castle that the queen lives in. You have literal knights in shining armor trying to like save damsels in distress and things like that running across the land everywhere. It's like this is CD Projekt Red having a bit of fun doing their version of like Lord of the Rings fantasy and kind of like medieval romanticism. It feels like this is like the idealized version of like a Renaissance fair.
It's almost like CD Projekt Red going, let's just make The Witcher a fairy tale for a little bit.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. How far into it did you say you were?
Well, like I said, I don't want to discuss the story particularly, but I've played through sort of the opening events.
Okay.
I guess the opening events aren't really a spoiler for anything, but basically there's a monster that is killing people in Toussaint, and you've been summoned there by the queen. I don't know if she's a queen actually. She might just be like a duchess. You've been summoned there to deal with this monster, and I've kind of got through the opening quests that introduce you to like what the monster is and what the sort of lay out the basic things of the plot, and I'm kind of a little bit past that, but I've actually spent a lot of time just exploring the countryside, which, not unusual for Witcher, is really nicely organically designed, and just walking from one place to another, I get sidetracked constantly, not just by like the question marks that you see on your map, but just by kind of seeing a cool thing. I'll see like, a little bit of a tower in the distance and think like, oh, I wonder what's over there. So I've put a few hours into it now, but I'm only really now making progress on the main quest, which seems quite interesting. Again, it also seems like as much as it's dealing with monsters and things like that, which is fairly standard for The Witcher, it also seems like it's got a little bit of lightheartedness to it. Like again, I don't want to sort of talk specifics about it, but this isn't the main quest, but there was a bandit quest, or not a bandit quest, but there were bandit camps in an area which I was clearing out when I was playing the other day, And you know how in The Witcher, when you clear out one of those, bandit camps on the map, you often find a book or a letter. And you read that book and letter and you get a little bit of backstory about like why these bandits were camped in the middle of nowhere. It's like a letter they've written to their wife or orders
Yeah, and
from their
sometimes
leader.
it leads you to treasure nearby. Sometimes stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. It's their way of putting a little bit of like story into these small, basically just like groups of enemies. Well, there was an area I was going through, and this is like, if you don't want any spoilers at all about anything that ever happens in Blood and Wine, then skip 2 minutes. But this is just like basically just world building. There are all these notes left in these bandit camps, and I read the first one, and it's the usual kind of thing, like orders from the leader of the bandits telling him what to do. I get to the next one, and it starts mentioning like that it's like a letter to someone's wife, and the bandit is talking about the fact that for some reason all of the other bandits have like taken up writing diaries. And then as you move through this area, this thread continues where all of the notes that you find in the bandit camps are kind of puzzling at the fact that all of these nasty bandits are all quite literate and are keeping diaries and leaving notes. And it's like the game is kind of self-aware of the ridiculousness of the fact that all of these drunken bandits leave nice little notes for Geralt so he can understand the context of what they were doing in each of these areas.
I don't know if I noticed, just didn't notice or have forgotten at this point. But yeah, that's really great. I just had another quick question about stuff that I don't think is main story, and it's been so long now since I played that I could even be thinking of the wrong part of the game. But it's funny that you mentioned the similarities in setting to Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood, etc. Because in Revelations, I think it was, you kind of manage your own, like you have like your own home base of operations, and it's not just your home; it's kind of like a little area. And I'm fairly certain it's in Blood and Wine that you kind of get your own little winery somehow through some part of the quest. Is that in Blood and Wine? Have you encountered that yet?
Yeah, you do. You get that like really early on. You
Yes.
get sort of gifted a vineyard estate, and yeah, you're exactly right. It is kind of similar to the Assassin's Creed thing where you kind of get your little villa to develop, and I'm really enjoying that so far. It feels actually like a really nice thing to have in this DLC, which is set, which presumably is set after the end of the main game, because you get these like, things like armor racks and weapon racks and trophy
Yeah.
cabinets where you can like I'm putting on display like my best set of Witcher armor that I've built, or my Grandmaster Witcher swords, which I don't use anymore because I've found like a better rare weapon, but I just want to like have that hanging on the wall. It's
That's
really
exactly what I was gonna say. That like some of the Assassin's Creed games, you can do all the furnishings and put up paintings and whatever, and that seems fine if that's what you want to do. But I really appreciated it because, like you said, I might have fully developed, my Grandmaster Ursine armor, but have since got some legendary pieces that perhaps do me better. But it seems like a waste. I don't just want to leave this armor I spent heaps of time collecting and crafting just in my inventory. So it's kind of, even though still no one's seeing it except me, but it feels like I'm doing something with it.
yeah. I really appreciated that it gives a use for all these items that are otherwise just sitting in my stash and that I haven't got rid of because it's kind of like, oh, that's a cool thing, or I've sort of attached some meaning to that item, so I'm not going to throw it away. It's nice to be able to do stuff with those things. The last thing I wanted to say, which is also kind of about the setting, is I'm really enjoying the fact that it is set in Toussaint, which is a vassal state of Nilfgaard, because throughout the whole of Witcher 3, you're pretty much always dealing with people who hate the Nilfgaardians. And, the Nilfgaardians are like invading and things like that. And everyone you talk to is hating them and they want to fight them. And even when you kind of deal with Nilfgaard, it's always like the baddies and things like that. It's really interesting to be playing this in a part of the world where there are Nilfgaardians there and they're just kind of normal people. And people from Toussaint don't talk about Nilfgaard like they're the baddies and like they're the enemies. It's just like, oh yeah, just we have the ambassador from Nilfgaard here, or this merchant is Nilfgaardian, and it's kind of it's kind of meaningless. Like it doesn't add anything to the actual gameplay, but as a player who's like really engaged with the setting, it's kind of cool for that to be a bit of a change of pace, to not have that overarching kind of Nilfgaard versus the North War being the backdrop to everything.
That is interesting. Like the more you're talking, the more I'm like, was I not paying attention to this game at all, or like has it just been a while since I've played it? Because you might remember I mentioned I got right up to the end and my armor was no my silver sword and my armor was so borked that I had to go back a save and make sure I had the appropriate kits and stuff to fix it up because I couldn't finish the very last boss battle. And so when I think about Blood and Winter, I'm focusing so much on this final act of the game because the "Are you ready to continue?" is actually like a large portion of the end of the game. So like I had to go back a long way. So I've done that twice now.
And you had that long gap in between.
And now it's been ages since I even did it the second time. So yeah, it's entirely possible that I thoroughly enjoyed it at the time. But like it's I'm still excited hearing about it. If we didn't have CD Projekt Red's next one, Cyberpunk, coming out this year, I might even have a look at dusting it off and just playing through all three again, but it's a big commitment.
Yeah, before we started recording, JT and I were chatting a little bit about Blood and Wine, kind of talking about the story, and we were talking about any potential new Witcher games they made, and one of the things that I kind of thought of then was the idea of like a remake of the first two, something like that, like a way for people like you to be able to play through at least the first two, if not like do all three again. But I don't know how likely that is. But yeah, that's about all I have to say about Blood and Wine. So I'm gonna leave that there, and yeah, I'll come back to that hopefully next episode once I have hopefully finished it. But I think JT had another game that he was gonna talk about.
Yeah, so one other game that I have finished since the last podcast is the last series in the Max Payne. The last game in the Max Payne series, which is Max Payne 3. And yeah, I really, 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 really love that series. Always have, and I finally got around to playing that. So again, I'm playing a game that is sort of received pretty good reviews, far too late. But it is an excellent end to the series. Very, very different to Max Payne 1 and 2, which is much more sort of film noir sort of setting and themes. This is still sort of follows on from that a bit, but it's a little bit more action orientated. And yeah, just excellent. Really, really love it.
So I've never played any of the Max Payne games, but I'm a huge fan of Remedy, who I think were chiefly in charge of 1 and 3 and kind of tangentially involved in 2, if I remember correctly. And I love Alan Wake and Control most recently. So my question is it worth me going back to Max Payne as a series? Do you think they still hold up?
I think so. So Remedy did 1 and 2, and they didn't, and Rockstar did 3.
Okay, yeah.
But there was a lot of crossover between 2 and 3, so it was very much a handing of the baton to Rockstar Games, because Rockstar were already pretty heavily invested in Max Payne 2 as the publisher. So there was a lot of, it's seamless. You wouldn't tell that it was really made by a different studio other than graphics and things like that. But I think for you, Timmy, knowing the kind of games you like and knowing you really enjoyed Alan Wake, it's would be an excellent sort of game for you to play. I think that still holds up, because Max Payne 1 came out in 2001, but it was pretty far ahead of its time. It was the first sort of game to have the Matrix bullet time feature in the action sequences. The voice acting is awesome. The setting is awesome. I think you'd really, really like it. 2 is probably the low point of the series, but it's by no means a bad game. But it's absolutely crucial for the total storyline of all 3 games.
Right.
So I think if you can get your hands on them, I mean, it's not hard. I'm not sure if you can get them on PS4 though. I don't think they ever did like a remastered version of them or anything. So
When
you
you
might
say
need
that,
to
when you
go
say
on.
that,
Sorry.
yeah, sorry. When you say that 2 is the low point of the game series, do you mean in terms of gameplay or just like the narrative isn't quite as compelling?
Probably the narrative. Number 1 and 2 were clearly made with them not really knowing what was going to happen with the series. 3 picks up really well because it's sort of set a fair bit after 1 and 2, which are set very close to each other. So that's why they can sort of get away with it and have a lot of retrospective throwbacks and insights to the first 2 games in number 3. Whereas number 2, I think, was a little bit confused because I don't think they really had an idea of if they were going to make a 3rd game that would be set right after the 2nd game. So that's sort of apparent. So the narrative is, sort of the story in general is a little bit weaker than number 1, but it's a good sort of supplementary piece of game that follows on well from number 1 as well. So again, it's not a bad game at all. I still really enjoyed it, and the gunplay in all the games, especially the 3rd one, is just phenomenal. The action sequences are really good. So, if shooting is your thing, you'll love the game. If you just want to play it for the narrative, it's really good. Number 1 and 2 were actually really they're presented as a graphic novel, so there's no real cutscenes per se. It's actually goes into like comic book strips of what's happening, and that's how the story is told from that point of view, and then it sort of fires into the actual gameplay.
Sorry, did they use that again in 3?
3 they didn't. 3 went
Okay.
3 went into like an action movie sort of telling. So they did away with the comic book or graphic novel sort of sequences, but it's not jarring in any sense of the word. I really enjoyed the fact that they sort of went past that. And again, because the 3rd game is set so far in the future from the other games, they can kind of get away with it being with presenting it in a different sort of manner, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's number 1 and 2 still hold up. I played them again for the 2nd time probably 4 years ago, I reckon, and still really enjoyed them.
That's cool. I'd seen some footage of Max Payne 1 recently and had kind of felt like graphically it looked pretty terrible. Like it felt like it was from that era where it's like 3D, which has aged very badly, if you know what I mean. There's like how like new 3D has aged worse than the stuff that came just before it that wasn't 3D because of like low textures and all the sharp edge polygons everywhere. And I felt a bit like that the game looked very dated in that sense. But I guess it's like it's the same era as stuff like Half-Life and things like that. I suppose it's just a couple of years after that.
Yeah, it's about 4 or 5 years after Half-Life 1. Definitely looks way better than number 1 than Half-Life.
Okay.
But you're right. It definitely hasn't dated that well graphically, but for the type of game it is, I don't think it's a detractor. I still really enjoy it. And a funny little anecdote is that I was actually one of the first people in the world to actually play the game officially. Because
Max Payne 1.
Max Payne 1, I was one of the very first people in the world to actually play it properly. You know, obviously the game was pirated or leaked before that, but I actually was in Finland at their equivalent of JB Hi-Fi. I can't remember what it's called, but me and my dad were just happened to be in Helsinki where at the major launch for Max Payne, and I was like third or fourth in line to play it on the computer. And yeah, they had a dude there, like it was actually one of the developers from Remedy dressed up as Max Payne, explaining, you know, the bullet time feature and stuff while you're playing it. So that was pretty cool. So
shooting guns at people.
yeah, and it was all over the news. Being a Finnish a Finnish IP, it was all over the news. You know, that week when they were releasing it, because it was this big. I think it was like one of the biggest or most expensive Finnish games ever to be released at the time. So yeah, so that's I guess in that way it sort of holds a special place in my heart as well. But yeah, great games.
And therefore, Disc and Dice podcast has more credibility speaking about Max Payne than any other gaming podcast. Thank you.
Absolutely, you heard it here first. I'm the authority on Max Payne now.
It was nice that in the credits for Max Payne 3, they dedicated it to you.
Yes, me as
But
Jared,
the thing is,
the fourth person ever to play it. Not
the thing is, they didn't
3.
they didn't name you because they didn't know your name. They just said like this game is dedicated to that kid who played the game in the shop in Helsinki.
Yeah,
you know,
right, it's in there. You won't know, and you won't know if that's true or not until you play the game. So go and play it. Call us out on our bullshit.
We might take a bit of a break, I reckon, and then come back and we've got a topic for you this week. Alrighty, welcome back, and thank you for sticking around. As mentioned just before that little musical interlude, we decided to have a bit of a chat about a topic that is on our minds at the moment regarding gaming, of course. But this time, it's not about doing the gaming ourselves. More and more, if you are a YouTube user or you watch Twitch and various other streaming platforms, Mixer I think is a new one as well, you'll know that there's just as many people simply watching other people play games as there are playing them themselves. So we wanted to have a bit of a chat about watching games instead of playing them. And that sounds pretty broad. So I wanted to ask you guys, because I don't do a lot of watching of games myself. If I'm not playing it myself, I don't have a lot of interest. So I guess I wanted to kick it off by asking you guys, JT and Paul, is there a way you decide which game you're going to watch versus which ones you're happy to wait to play? Like, does it have to, if it's over a certain threshold of interest, are you like, I'm not going to watch that, I'll get to it eventually? Or, you know, is it like, I can't wait to play it, I have to watch it? Like, which way does it work for you?
This is a great question, actually. I kind of had the same thing written down as something I wanted to ask you guys. For me, the kind of stuff I don't watch is or are games which are very like story heavy that I am really interested in playing. So stuff like RPGs, stuff like very linear story games like Last of Us and things like that I know that I plan to play. That's the kind of stuff that I will avoid watching almost entirely. The stuff that I do watch, though, is I will watch very linear story games that I 100% know that I won't play. So I watched like Uncharted 4 because I didn't have a PS4 and there was no point in the near future where I was going to be getting a PS4. So I watched someone play that one on YouTube. But in general, actually, that's not the majority of the stuff I watch. The stuff that I usually gravitate towards is things that are not story-based at all, but things that are kind of more sandboxy and systems based and that are a bit replayable. And usually this is strategy games. So usually I will watch YouTubers play things like Civilization or Total War or Stellaris and things like that. The kind of game where, you know, you can't spoil it for yourself, where I'm just watching like their version of all these crazy systems interacting and throwing up weird, you know, stories.
For me, it's probably, yeah, very, very similar. More specifically, though, I'll watch games that I just can't play because I don't have the platform. So a lot of games that are only on PS4, or maybe on, you know, Nintendo Switch. Some games I'll watch on that. So I watched some people play a bit of Breath of the Wild, not the whole thing because it's, you know, from what I hear, it's a pretty large game, but just to get a bit of an idea of what it is, you know, what things people like about the game and why they're playing it. I think Uncharted 4, we actually even went to Timmy's house and watched him play a bit of that, didn't we?
Yeah. We kind of watched
did,
like
yes.
a bit of it with, you know, Timmy was our streamer for a little bit of that. And then,
Yes.
and then I think both of us watched like a YouTube version online for the rest of it.
Yeah, it just got a bit, the logistics got a bit too difficult. So we just watch someone else, but yeah.
See, it's interesting to me hearing, Paul, your way of looking at it, because I guess you know what kind of games I like, and the kind of games that I like are the narrative ones. So those are the ones you discuss with me, and so I had no idea that more often than not the ones you're watching are kind of the open-ended ones, because, you know, you spoke about watching bits of Uncharted 4 that you didn't watch me play, and I think you watched a playthrough of Spider-Man for PS4 as well, you know, which is kind of thing. And not only was it you were talking to me about those ones, because those are the kinds of games I like, I feel like if I was going to watch somebody stream a game, I would want it to be a really story-heavy one. You know, if I'm going to watch somebody play like a strategic one or, you know, an open-ended one, I would skip around that video. I wouldn't watch it properly. I'd be like, I want to see a specific thing, or I'm trying to find how someone does this thing, you know? If I'm going to sit there and watch a playthrough of a game, I think I'm much more likely to do that on a story one.
Yeah. Like, do you think that's just because you tend towards like narrative games more?
I mean, I would assume so, because it seems like a no-brainer to me, you know?
Yeah.
Like, but then again, I don't really watch any streamers. Like, what friend of the show, Josh, he streams on Twitch once a week, and I kind of try to watch him because he's a good friend of mine, and I think he's an interesting guy, and, you know, he tries to stay really positive, which I think is a good thing in current streaming landscape. But outside of him, I'm not really going out of my way just to watch streamers. And, you know, most streamers are doing competitive multiplayer games, which aren't my bag either. So it's really the YouTube playthroughs would be the only thing I'm looking at. And so I guess I want to know how much I'm strapping in for, not just I'm going to watch someone play a game for a while. That doesn't really interest me. I want to see a plot and know there's an endpoint coming, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it's like, yeah, I get that. I guess, like I said, I wonder whether maybe it's like your preference in games as well, because like like the strategy stuff I enjoy almost for the same reasons I enjoy playing them. It's that it's almost that they specifically don't have what you were just talking about. Like, they don't have an endpoint they're kind of working to. It's just a person starts playing, and then whatever decisions they make cause all the systems to interact and spin off, you know, a totally unique version of that game. And I like playing that myself. And I just find that I also like I have specific YouTubers who do that stuff really well. So, you know, there are some YouTubers playing games like Total War who are just min-maxing. And their thing is that as very quickly as possible, they will build up the most powerful armies with the most powerful cities, and they will just try and take over the whole map as fast as possible. And like, that's their thing. And like, that's of no interest to me. I don't want to watch someone just, you know, steamroll the game because they, you know, figured out the exploits. Whereas like, I will watch YouTubers who start a game of Total War and they kind of say like, all right, I'm going to play as this faction and I've got this really weird goal I'm trying to achieve, or I'm going to try and play this Total War campaign and never declare war on anyone and just bribe everyone and win the game by doing that. And so it's often like it's people taking unusual approaches to playing the games in ways that either like I hadn't thought of, and sometimes, to be honest, it's ways that make the game super difficult and I'm just not good enough to pull it off. But this person who understands the game really well can do a real strange playthrough of something like Total War and make it really entertaining. And if I tried to do the same thing, I'd just be beaten at the start because I couldn't do it.
That leads me to another question I had for you guys. You're kind of talking about people being entertaining and how they're entertaining, and having certain streamers or YouTubers that you particularly like and you go back to. So, being that you guys do watch a lot, what for you makes one particular YouTuber or player better or more watchable than another? I know the one you've spoken to me about, Rad Brad. I think you guys watched him play. I think that's who played Spider-Man and Uncharted 4. And you mentioned you liked him because he didn't speak too much. Like he commented on things here and there, but he kind of shut up for a lot and let the game kind of speak for itself. Is that pretty standard for the kind of people you guys are watching?
Brad's good because, and there's other people like him, but it's almost like that kind of thing where you would be sitting in a room with a friend playing a game. So there would be some, every now and then there's a comment made about something, but you're not watching the game and having them talk over it the whole time. It's like you're both watching the game and, he speaks or says something the same time that sort of anyone would, even if you're playing the game yourself. So it gives you a good chance to actually experience the game while still get a bit of entertainment from someone, making a funny comment every now and then, or just, I guess it's like for me with him, it's a bit of like reaffirming, a reaction. He'll have a reaction to something in the game that sort of like I might have as well. So it's a bit of like I know it's a strange phenomenon, I think, to be honest. It becomes stranger the more you really think about it. But yeah, for Rad Brad, he's measured. He's not in your face like, PewDiePie or whatever, where he's obviously just his audience is like children, so obviously he has to be over the top. But for someone like me, it's like I was sitting in the same room as Paul or even you, when we were watching you play Uncharted, you might comment on something, you might say something every now and then, but for the most part, you're really just playing the game and watching it.
Yeah, I think you put that really well, JT, actually, that like it's just reactions, but they're not like, there's some streamers where like, their reactions have to be like screaming at the top of their lungs because, like you say, like their audience are children and idiots. But his is like, it's very organic. So it's like he might say like nothing for like 10 minutes and then something will happen and he'll just be like, oh shit, or something like that, because it's like a big moment in the game. But he won't be like, oh my god, did you guys see that? Like, tell me in the comments what you thought or something. He'll just react like a person who's playing the game. And
that's a good way to put it. Is it someone like him and other people who I watch who are sort of, I guess, similar in terms of how much they talk? It's natural. I think that's the best way to put it, is it's natural.
And I think, Timmy, you kind of said it there. I think the thing I like about him, and this is specifically for those kind of linear story games, is not talking during cutscenes and things like that is like important. And the other thing I would say specifically about that guy is he's also just really positive, which I quite like. Like he just likes everything he's doing. He just plays a game, and even if like there's like bugs and stuff goes wrong, he's just like laughing about it and he's just having fun the whole time. And the thing is, who knows, maybe that's the persona that he takes for the games and stuff like that. I don't even know, but it's just kind of nice. It's nice to watch someone play a game and you just feel like he's having a good time as well.
Yeah, all right, that makes sense. Like Shayla and I, obviously, with kids in the house, we see a lot of YouTubers, and even for the kids' channels, there's a lot of playing games and just reacting to it. And there are a few that the boys watch that make me want to claw my eyes out with just how over the top they're being all the time. Like they need to keep their energy up. So like they're reacting to every little thing so much that when something big actually happens, they have to then turn it up to 11. And it's too much. And I know that this is, again, they're playing like that Hello Neighbor game or Baldi's Basics or these really kind of aimed at kids games with not much to them. So they're having to keep the excitement up themselves. But it's enough to make me, not want to seek out any kind of YouTuber, um, to watch a playthrough of a game, because it's just like I want I want something like Radbrad, I suppose, because you want that organic reaction. You want to feel like, all right, the game earned that reaction. It's not that this YouTuber is trying to make you come back and watch more of the videos.
Right, right. The other thing I wanted to mention, because like I said, I probably watch more of the like strategy stuff. Uh, I kind of look for a completely different thing there. I almost want the opposite. I like someone who explains what they're doing, because I'm not heaps good at those games, and I also find that watching someone else play them helps me pick up on little tips here and there. So they'll do something over like, oh, I've never thought of doing it that way, or using my army in that way, or building a city like that. And so I do like a YouTuber who will say, oh, I'll build this here because blah 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 blah, and they'll explain their thought process, because there are a lot of them specifically for stuff like Total War, and it tends to be a lot of the kind of like the min max ones who are just trying to exploit, that they just play it, or they almost play it, and the assumed knowledge is that you are kind of a pro and you understand every system in the game perfectly how it works, and they'll just play at full speed. And I like someone who kind of slows down, explains what they're doing, and kind of gets into it a little bit. Like, you guys know I like to sort of even role play in strategy games and stuff like that, to not try and just win in the best possible way, but to try and have like a cool story along the way. I do like it when the YouTuber gets into it like that, so they kind of make decisions in the game not based on what is best for the game, but what is sort of best for the story they're trying to tell.
I guess that's important if they're playing a game that's not story based, right? I
True.
guess what I was saying, like I look for the narrative and I kind of want to see a plot. And obviously, you're not going to go into every game thinking that, but I'm sure it's a powerful, storytelling device, like to get someone to come back and continue watching your YouTube channel if you can weave a story of sorts, even if that's just I'm going to go for this kind of win in this, tactical strategy game, and I'm going to make it difficult for myself by doing this thing like this because I think it looks cool. Like that. All of a sudden, it's not just watch me play a strategy game.
Yeah, and they often do they do interesting things with the audience. Like, they will sort of they'll ask the audience what to name certain characters, because you get sort of named characters in stuff like Total War, and then you can rename them. And the guy will ask like, what do you guys want to call this person? And you feel you get a bit more attached, even if you're not the one who came up with the name. There was like there was a game of Total War I was watching where there's like a wizard, there's like a bright wizard, and then the audience asked to rename it to Tim after like Tim the Wizard from Monty Python, and then it just meant that like for the rest of the campaign, like he'd be going into battle led by Tim, and it's just kind of funny, and you kind of you just feel like you're a bit more invested in it than if it was whoever the bright wizard of the empire, whatever generic name Warhammer had given him. So there's kind of like fun stuff like that I enjoy.
Well, that kind of leads me to the last question I had for you guys about watching versus playing, and that was about the investment in in the game itself. So obviously, like, it's different, right? Because you can become invested in the experience that the person who's doing the playing is having. So if there's someone who's quite charismatic and good at talking to what they're doing, I'm sure you can kind of get attached to their enjoyment of it. But going back to my friend Josh, who I mentioned before, he heard all of this great stuff about The Last of Us, and he decided to watch a playthrough of it. And the ending, which I think we all agree is super powerful and impactful, had no effect on him. He was just like, eh. And we had a discussion about the watching versus the playing because he felt it was because he didn't feel connected to the people in the game because he didn't control anything or make those actions and decisions, and so therefore he didn't feel like responsible, I suppose is a good way to put it. And I know that we're talking about lots of different types of games, but I was wondering if you guys, because you do go back and you watch lots of games and you continue to do it, it's something you enjoy doing, and I just wonder how you guys have come up against, perhaps feeling less attached to story, characters, events because you're watching someone else do it.
I guess it really comes down to the person playing it for me. I think you hit the nail on the head for my answer, just because it really does come down to the fact that I'm seeing someone else be invested or enjoy the game or be upset in the game or what have you, or those, I'm sort of feeling their reactions in a way. And if that's, for someone who is an over the top YouTuber or streamer or whatever, I probably would feel less attached because I'd be like, okay, whatever, they've brought me out of it. But then for someone to actually be really invested in the game, and be really affected by it in a natural way, then I'm probably more inclined to have the same sorts of feelings towards the game as what they would.
Okay.
So I don't feel I really need to be playing the game to get the emotional attachment, but that's just me.
So, say for someone like Rad Brad, now this might not work because you've already mentioned that you tend to agree with his reactions and feelings about things when you're watching him. That's why you go back because you're pretty aligned on how he's reacting to stuff. But we've also mentioned that he doesn't say a lot. So when you're watching someone like that and he's not saying heaps, and so it's kind of left up to you to have your own reactions as well, do you feel like you're losing anything by just watching it instead of playing it, or do you feel like he does enough that you're still getting that experience through him?
Probably getting the experience through him, I think. I mean, obviously, without playing the game for yourself, there's always got to be something you're missing out on. But I guess the reason that I watch someone like him is a lot of it is just to do with convenience. Like, it's convenient to have him play the game for me, basically. I know it sounds lazy, but it's kind of how it is. It's like even back as far as, when I was younger, watching my brother play Shadows of the Empire on the Nintendo 64. I loved that game, but I wanted to watch my brother finish the game. It was like a little bit of a ritual to sit down and, you know, play the game in quotes with him. Watch what he did with the game. Like I loved that. I didn't finish the game for myself until well after he finished it because I felt satisfied having watched someone else do it and me sort of be there for the journey without really having any input. So I guess that's another way of sort of putting it. It's that same kind of thing.
I suppose we've only really spoken about watching strangers on the internet play games, and we've kind of left out completely what it's like sitting with somebody else and watching games, because that's something I've done more of than watching on the internet, and I can absolutely get behind that. That's a much more shared experience.
Yeah, I think it's this. Without getting too philosophical, I think that's what draws people to want to do it. And obviously, the internet is just a different medium to experience that through. And obviously, well, depending on how much you watch the person, you might feel like you kind of know them. But I think that's at the heart of it. It feels like that's sort of the success behind the phenomenon is that people, it's a bit of a throwback to maybe when they played it as a younger person, or it's the same kind of feeling that people are getting now, even people as young as, maybe Shayla's kids or, my partner's kid, like they obviously didn't really have anyone to grow up with and watch games with, but they still get that same experience because it's, they're seeing someone else play the game now. So it might be that same kind of thing. I mean, another thing as well, like back when I was 15, I remember I recorded myself playing I think it was Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, Carmageddon 2, and Medal of Honor Allied Assault, like 5 to 10 minutes of each game, and I recorded it through my TV to a VHS, and I brought it into school the next day. This is in like year 11, and in the media class, like me and like 10 other people just watched the videotape, and like I think our friend Michael Villa actually ended up taking it home. He was like, dude, can I borrow this? Like, he wanted to what he was like a really, really rudimentary form of,
Streaming.
YouTube streaming or something, watching it on a videotape. But I guess it's just that, like you said, it's like a shared experience, whether you know the person or not, whether you're with them or not, you're still experiencing it with them in a way. Maybe that's why it's so, prevalent, why it's so enjoyable.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, if you can, like you said, if you can feel like you know the streamer, then or the YouTuber, then it kind of helps you get more invested. And I guess Timmy, you're kind of right. I think that maybe some of the story-based games, it's not so much about that, or at least for me, because it's sort of you're just watching for the story. But for other stuff, I think it is more like if you get to know the person and they do similar things, like even when they make like the same mistakes, and you can be like, oh, this guy always makes this mistake. It's almost like it's just a fun thing. It's like you said, it's kind of like a friend or something like that. But back to the question you had about like whether you're lose investment, and you had the example of Josh playing Last of Us and kind of not feeling the ending that much. I watched Uncharted 4, and the ending of Uncharted 4, which again I don't want to spoil, but I hope you remember what it was, the kind of like very end bit that like blew me away. And I was just watching that game all the way through, but the way that game ends at the very, very end, just like I'd feel like even playing it, it wouldn't have any more of an effect on me than watching it. And I don't know whether that's because I'd played some of the other Uncharted games, so I built up some kind of investment with those characters. But yeah, I found that game to be super, super powerful just as a viewer, which was interesting. But the other example I had was the opposite, which was recently I've watched about 4 or 5 hours of Control, and I really struggled through those hours watching that game. And I kind of watched it because, Timmy, you talked about it on the podcast, and we kind of talked about it off air as well, about all the kind of cool paranormally X-Files type stuff that's in that game, all the little world building things that they do. And I felt like you told me about a few of them, and it seemed like that stuff would resonate with me. So I started watching a playthrough of Control, and for two things, I think the combat to story balance was so far in favor of combat that for just someone watching, it was like 80 to 90% just gunfights. And like that's for me anyway, that wasn't interesting as a viewer. I could see that like the way the character moves and stuff, you have all these powers and you kind of like boost around the level and pull and push things and stuff like that, that those would be fun gameplay systems. But as a viewer, that's not interesting. And the amount of world building stuff that you got, firstly because there's just not as much of it compared to combat, but secondly because I feel like what I've seen in other areas of Control, part of the way you get that stuff is by stopping and reading like documents and watching things that you find. And the playthrough I was watching, they really weren't doing that. They were just kind of playing through the story and not sort of exploring each area. And I feel like that was a game for me that absolutely didn't work to watch.
All of that game's lore is delivered in like collectibles, and they do it really effectively, but you have to be taking the time to do it. And what you were saying with the gameplay as well, it parcels out all your different powers so nicely so that just holding the controller, you can use all of your powers without having to, hold down a button to open the power menu or anything, right? Like everything is just fluid and nice, and you feel so powerful and in control when you're playing, right? But I can understand how it would just look like any other kind of, you have a couple of powers and you shoot your gun kind of game. if you were watching it. So yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's a really good example of kind of what I was talking about.
Yeah, it's. I was really disappointed actually because I had kind of hoped. I wasn't even really planning to watch the whole thing. I was sort of thinking I'll watch a bit of this. I'll get some of the cool X-Filesy type stuff, like I said, that's in there that I know you talked about, and it just it didn't translate to that format for me.
Mm-hmm.
In just a general sense as well, it's a good way for people who might not be able to afford or might not want to dedicate an amount of money to a game that they're not sure about. It's just a great way for everybody and anybody to sort of experience a game without having to pay for it, whether they're going to play it down the track or not, whether they can or can't afford it. It's a way to just sort of, see what a game is like, experience it in, through the lens of someone else. So it's, I guess that's just another win for why, you might choose to, watch streamers or what have you.
Quick question for Timmy, as the resident non-game watcher. Is there a game you can think of that you would watch? So I don't know, maybe something that you don't own the platform to be able to play it, or anything like that? Like, does anything spring to mind that might sort of get you interested in doing it?
So I think if I didn't have a PlayStation, I would have absolutely have watched Marvel's Spider-Man PS4, like because I'm just such a huge Spider-Man fan, and everything I'd seen from that game looks so beautiful and fluid, and yeah, I think I would have had to have watched that one. Again, I think at best I might have put it on while I was at work and be kind of like glancing down at it. It wouldn't be like a dedicate any real time to it. Still, I don't think that's just me. But yeah, I think that would have been the one.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, look, I guess it's just I will watch bits of a playthrough to get a feel for the game, but like unless I'm going to be able to play it, I'm probably not going to go looking for information or like reviews of a game, So yeah, and if I'm going to play it, I generally want as little spoiled as possible. Like even general concepts, I'm happy with just a blurb, and the reviews say that it's playable. It's not like alone in the dark, and it's a struggle just to walk. So yeah, I guess like for me, the appeal is so much in the playing for me. I learn by doing. Like I'm like is that kinetic learning? You know how there's different types of learning type. Like so just watching stuff doesn't do it for me in other parts of my life as well, and I think that translates to here.
We're gonna kind of wrap this section up now, but just as we're finishing, I'm kind of thinking that we haven't even touched on things like watching people play D&D and stuff like that, which we have done at least at PAX, and I've watched a bit of that online and things like that. So maybe that's just a topic for another day.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. Like the Omegathon at PAX is a great example of games that you wouldn't think would be spectator sports that all of a sudden are incredible to watch. Like Uno.
That's true.
You've got the crowd behind you. Everyone's cheering, and it's different dynamic. Yeah.
Right. That's almost like we're getting into like esports, I guess, once we start to consider that stuff, which I don't think any of us are particularly can talk about with particular expertise. I don't think.
Nah, we'd need to be getting Butters on the show for that one, I think.
We would.
There you go, Butters. Esports special just for you.
All right. Well, speaking of streaming, and speaking of Timmy's friend Josh, who does some streaming, Josh has actually written in with a question for us for this episode. So, hey, Blu-ray and D20 boys, if PC gaming was made illegal tomorrow, who knows why, and you are only allowed to have one gaming device, what would you choose? Let's say that you then have to stick with the brand you choose forever, and you have to trade in your current console every time you want to upgrade. Love the show, proud every episoder.
Thanks,
you may be the only one of those, Josh.
So no PC.
Well, I feel like that's fair because I would just choose PC, no question.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a good sort of condition to put on this.
I need to actually think about this. You guys answer that first.
I just want to make sure I'm approaching the question like you guys are. He's pretty much saying pick your brand and you get the current generation every time it comes out, sort of thing.
That's how I read it. That you kind of basically that.
So this isn't hard for me. I go PlayStation easily, just because I think for the past couple of gens, like the current one and the one before, they've just had the better exclusives, right? And that's what you got to judge it on, right? And I guess also going on, I shouldn't, but going on like E3 presentations, like, I feel like PlayStation have just seemed to be a little bit more in tune with what the players want. Like you remember that disastrous, like when the Xbox One was coming out and they tried to be like, and you can lend games to your friends by this horribly convoluted process in which you sell it back and they get it at a discounted price. And then Sony came out and said, this is how you do it. And they just handed the disc over. Like
Yeah.
Xbox went to all these great lengths to turn their device into like this huge media center with all of these perks and like really missed the boat on the gaming side of things. PlayStation kept it a little bit simpler. I think they've had stronger exclusives for like the entire lifetime of the current generation, both at launch and the whole way through. Like Microsoft seemed to be sticking to the like, hey, we have a new Gears of War, we got something in the Halo universe. Like, you know, I don't think they're keeping up with the exclusives in the same way that PlayStation are. So, yeah.
Yeah,
easy.
Xbox always seems a little bit more vague about their releases, to be honest. So I'd have to not agreeing with you as in the choice, but in the reasoning, yes.
Yeah.
So what's the choice then, JT?
My approach is a little bit different. I judge a gaming console by the sum of its best racing series. So I would have to pick Xbox because it's the only way I'd be able to play Forza.
That's a good
Forza.
choice.
So that's how simple it is for me.
I don't think Forza is better enough than other available racing games. Like it might still be the best one, but for that to commit you to the console, I think it would have to be like so far above every other racing game. And I mean, you guys have played lots more Forza than me, so I know that you know you've thrown in with Forza in a big way. But like there are plenty of other really great racing games that I could still get on PlayStation that I'm happy to throw in with.
Each to their own, Timmy. Each to their own.
This is a
Paul,
tough one.
how do you tackle this one?
This is a tough one. Like it, you know, it just makes me like the first line. If PC gaming was made illegal tomorrow, like it just, I'm just
You're already
depressed.
angry.
Yeah, like I think you know, I don't want to live in this world to begin with. If that's the first condition.
If PC gaming was made illegal tomorrow, Paul would be opening a speakeasy, a secret haven game.
Exactly.
The real life cyber hive.
Yeah. I'd be running the underground PC gaming community. But like I don't know, you know, that's not in the spirit of the question. So I'm generally, if we're talking consoles, my console of choice is the Xbox, and it has been for the 360 and it has been for the Xbox One. That's mostly because the vast majority of my friends are on those platforms, so I've stuck to those for those reasons. And you know, like I've got used to the controller, which I'm sure I would get used to the PlayStation controller if I had played with that for 2 generations. But you know, the Xbox One is just really comfortable for me. But the more that I think about this, the more I think that the stuff that I play most on my Xbox is cross-platform stuff. So it's stuff like FIFA. It's stuff like what have I played recently? Like Jedi Fallen Order. I want to play like the Red Dead games, things like that. All that stuff are things I can get on the PS4. And Timmy, I think you're right that it does have the better exclusives. Like if I had to pick between, you know, Gears of War, Halo, and Forza is the only one of those that gives me pause to say that, oh, I might want that one. Whereas Uncharted, Last of Us, other good PlayStation 4 exclusives, which I can't remember off the top of my head, like Spider-Man, you know,
Spider-Man.
yeah, stuff like that. Like it does have the better exclusives, and I think if this really was the situation, I would probably go PlayStation because I'd adapt to the controller. I'd just get FIFA and play it on PlayStation instead, and yeah, that's kind of how I'd go with this. I think so. I'd switch platforms in this situation.
Yeah, see, I've done like lots of both. Like I started on PS2. I had so many issues with it that I got a Xbox original, and that was super solid. So when it came to PS3 and 360, I went 360, stuck with that forever. But then, like you were saying about all your friends, when it came time for the next gen, all of my friends were on PlayStation. So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna take a punt again. Like hopefully they've sorted out the kinks from PS2
Yeah,
2 gens later. And I've, you know, I wouldn't say I've had no problems, but I've had no problems that I couldn't overcome with it. And you know, doing your research, Xbox still has its same quirks as well. So you're never
yeah,
going to
yeah.
be completely free of them. Um,
Did
but
I
yeah,
did either of you guys consider Nintendo for this?
I mean, like I did because it's Nintendo have had the absolute monopoly on the party game console, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Mario Kart, Mario Party, like Overcooked at the moment. Like there's so many like great party games, and it's the one that you bust out. And the Switch has the smaller controllers, so it's easier to get everybody around. More games that are split screen. So I did think about it, but how often are you doing the party game thing? You know,
I was
realistically,
just sort of
it makes up
thinking,
maybe 10% of my gaming time. If I'm being super generous, it's probably not even 5%.
Yeah,
yeah. I was just sort of thinking, if I had all three consoles all connected up to the same TV, the one know without a doubt that I would be turning on least is probably the Nintendo. And I think it's just because it's just got more niche games that like party games or casual games that I just wouldn't play nearly as much.
yeah. I feel like, in the same way that Xbox had Forza, the Switch would have, or Nintendo would have Pokemon, which would be another one that would kind of give me pause and be like, oh, no more Pokemon. But I don't think that I would give up everything else just for Pokemon. I have a Switch now and I enjoy it, but I feel like it works well as a complement to the other platforms, but I would never have one instead of the others. Like I feel like Nintendo games are so much more unique than Sony or PlayStation or Xbox games. Like as much as they have their exclusives, they're kind of all making the same kind of games. But Nintendo are really doing completely different stuff. But I wouldn't want that.
Really only.
Yeah, I wouldn't want that to be the only kind of gaming I had access to. I like having that as an addition to my kind of like serious games I can play on, Xbox and PC and stuff. Um, so yeah, I thought about it for a little bit, but then yeah, I kind of came to that conclusion that
Yeah,
on its own, I'd have to say no.
I think that's a good way of thinking about it. Like, if Nintendo were to release their brand new next gen console on the same day as Xbox and PlayStation, it'd be the first one I'd rule out. I'd be like, well, no, that's the sometimes console. That's
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I so we've got two PlayStations and an Xbox among us. I wouldn't have been surprised, Paul, if you also stuck with Xbox. So I'm glad to hear you've come to your senses. But
Forza,
anyway,
Forza will not forget this.
so yeah, feel free to send in any fictional scenarios you would like us to work out for you. discanddice@gmail.com is our email address. And
yeah. Those are
we'll let
always
you know,
fun.
yeah, we'll let you know in a few minutes all the different ways you can get in contact with us. But before we get to that, what are you guys planning on playing before the next episode?
Well, I'm going to continue on with Blood and Wine as we talked about a little bit today. Hopefully, I'll finish that off before the next episode of the pod. Apart from that, I am going to be playing some more Warcry, which was the Warhammer game that we talked about last episode, and so I might have some more thoughts on that the next time we talk. But that's probably it for me. Like Blood and Wine's it's a pretty big game. So that's going to be probably occupying most of my time, I reckon.
I think for me, it's probably going to be really getting more invested into Endless Space 2 now that I've played, a good few hours of it and starting to finally wrap my head around the mechanics. So look forward to hopefully getting into, experiencing everything the game has to offer by next pod. On top of that, Paul and I are starting to get a bit better momentum behind actually playing our Project Zomboid. So we'll be playing a little bit more of that and might start telling you a bit of the tales of our adventures and whatnot, if that's something that interests people. So let us know as well if that's something you want to hear about. How about you, Timmy?
So I'm pretty keen to keep tucking into Death Stranding. Like I kind of just gave it a go because Shayla fired it up and then wasn't in the right headspace to play it, and I kind of went, oh, I'll have a go. We just installed the update for it, so be ashamed to have wasted that time, and really enjoyed it. So I guess I'll keep plugging along with that, but I feel a little bit guilty because I'm yet to finish Jedi Fallen Order, so I might try and tick that off because I don't think I'm too far from the end.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about that story.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll try and do that. Death Stranding. I've been obsessed with this game on my phone at the moment called Hole.io. I don't know if you're meant to call it Holio. That's what we call it over here. You might have seen ads for it in other apps. It's like you're a hole on the ground and you just drag yourself around this isometric city and you have to suck up as much stuff as you can. You gradually get bigger, so when you start, you can only like kind of swallow fire hydrants and pedestrians, and you swallow enough of them and you can swallow like cars and park benches and stuff, and then eventually you've taken down the whole city. You got 2 minutes. Like there's a few different game modes, and it's just a really cool little time sink. Like it's one of those games that seems like there's nothing to it, but then you realize it's pretty hard to get a decent score, and then you work out how to get a decent score, and then all of a sudden you realize there's different strategies, and like yeah, both Shayla and I have been like just ignoring each other, sitting next to each other in bed playing this game for much longer than we'd care to admit. So I'll probably be playing a lot of that as well.
All right. Well, it sounds like we've all got some different things on the plate for next episode. But yeah, we're going to leave it there today. As Timmy mentioned before, you can get in touch with us by email, discanddice@gmail.com. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/discanddice, Twitter @discanddice. So you can find us at all the usual social media places. Send us questions if you've got them, suggestions of discussion topics, suggestions of games that Timmy should definitely watch a streamer play. I'd be interested if someone can tempt him to that. But yeah, that's all the games that we have time for today. So thanks, Timmy.
No worries. Thank you.
And thanks, JT.
Thank you very much.
And we'll see everyone again in a couple of weeks for more games.
Games.
James.